So, as we begin, everybody smile for me. Thank you. Everybody smile for me. There it is. Thank you, Clyde. Come on, Chief. Smile for me. There, boy. Thank you. Smile for me. Good. Everybody smile. Jim, are you smiling behind the computer? Attaboy. Good. Thank you. Makes us feel better, right? Makes us get that good deep breath. And as Christians, we should be very joyful. So thank you. You only have to do that 3 more times. And then you can go back to frowning if you want to. No, I'm teasing. So as we begin today, we will turn it, if you will, in your Bibles to 1 Corinthians chapter 12. And we'll study this context with the word all and what it means to us. We've referenced it before. We referenced it when we talked about Ephesians chapter 4, talked about unity of the church and who it was written to. But we'll specifically talk about chapter 12, verse 26 today. So as you're getting there, let's just kind of review what we've done this quarter. We started out with the foundation, love your God with all your strength, all your mind, all your soul. And then we moved to 2 Peter chapter 1 and giving all diligence. We referenced Noah and the flood, and we went to Hebrews 13 after that, and we talked about desiring to live honorably in all things. So then we talked about Romans chapter 3, and we referenced James chapter 1. All have sinned, fallen short. 2 Corinthians chapter 5, being reconciled to God. And then we moved to Ephesians 4, where it talks about walking in unity, the Father of all. And we referenced 1 Corinthians chapter 12, where it talks about, the unity of the church, and we're all one body. And so then we moved from there to Mark 16, verses 15 and 16. And Clyde talked about how to go into all the world, go into all the nations. And then we moved into Colossians chapter 1, where the whole context is Christ is all sufficient, all supreme. And then last week, when Kyle filled in for me, you talked about Luke chapter 14, verses 29, and then specifically verse 25 through 33, forsaking all and living for Christ. So the progression has been, the word all has to, there was a do all. You had to do something. And then the next section was kind of like, Christ is all. The church is all. So we've built kind of a, we had to start with love. We had to start with all your mind. And we've built to the point now that we can talk about being compassionate. We can be loving. And verse 26 teaches us that if one member suffers, we all suffer. But also in that same verse, it teaches if one member is honored, we should be rejoicing with them. So let's talk about that some today, that concept of suffering with those that suffer. We are in a unique situation for the last couple of weeks, maybe even a month. Heather referenced it yesterday that we can't remember the names of people that have lost loved ones that's so great at one time. So I think it's timely that we talk about this context. So as we begin to talk about it, how do we suffer with someone? I think that's where we have to get down to it. We have to boil everything down and apply it today. How do we do that? So the context surrounding verse 26 actually starts in verse 1. Who is chapter 12 written to? In verse 1. I'm sorry? Christians. Specifically, the Greek Christians, right? So who is not a Jew? Who is the Gentiles that he's talking to? We can all raise our hand because he's written it to me. He's written it to us because we're all Gentiles. That's where the context is starting. So the first 5 verses is he's teaching that. And then that brings us to verse 6. It talks about the diversities of activities. It talks about different talents, if you will. And we would say it like this. A minister, a song leader, someone that can lead an opening prayer in public worship, ladies that can teach a ladies' Bible class or teach our children. We all have different talents, right? That's what Paul is teaching here. We're all the same. We all have the same goal, but we do it in different capacities. I was teasing Jim the other day, a month ago, I guess. I asked him if he wanted me to lead singing. He politely said no. Why does he not want me to lead singing? He knows I can't sing. That's exactly right. He knows I can't sing. I'll tell you something else about Jim. When we were working through the COVID stuff, I was sitting on this pew and Alan was sitting on this pew and Jim was leading singing. He said it was the hardest time he'd ever had leading singing. Because I was singing. But why didn't he want me to lead singing? Because I can't sing. I mean, I open my mouth and I sing every service to the best of my ability. Thank you. I say that all the time. She said, if I'm singing to the Lord, it's beautiful. And I agree with that. But publicly, I don't have the talent to get you to sing beautifully. Why do we have different talents? Or why do we have different abilities? It's just like a basketball team. You know, my reference is basketball. It's the greatest sport known to man, right? So if you have a basketball team and you have 5 point guards, what happens? What happens, Doug? Fighting over the ball. For one thing, there's a list this long. Yes, sir, Steve. That's right. That's exactly right. Steve referenced actually the text that we're going to read in just a moment. 1 Corinthians chapter 12. It talks about the eye or the big toe or your fingers. If you had everyone, if you only had ears, we would be excellent listeners. But we couldn't see and we couldn't apply anything, right? Yes, Dennis. Different skill set. That's exactly right. So let's pick up in this context and let's read verses 12 through the end of the chapter. For as the body is one and has many members, but all the members of that one body, being many, are one body, so also is Christ. For by one Spirit we were all baptized into one body, whether Jews or Greeks, whether slaves or free, and have all been made to drink into one Spirit. For in fact, the body is not one member, but many. If thy foot should say, because I am not of the hand, I am not of the body, is it therefore not of the body? And if the ear should say, because I am not an eye, I am not of the body, is it therefore not of the body? If the whole body were an eye, where would be the hearing? If the whole were hearing, where would be the smelling? But now God has set the members, each one of them, in the body, just as He pleased. And if they were all one member, where would the body be? Let's pause just a second. If we only had one talent, where would the church be? That's what he's teaching, right? Several of you just kind of shook your head. And I agree with that. It would not be in existence, right? But now indeed, verse 20, but now indeed, there are many members, yet one body. And the eye cannot say to the hand, I have no need of you, nor again the head to the feet, I have no need of you. No, much rather those members of the body which seem to be weaker are necessary. All those members of the body which think to be less honorable, on these bestow greater honor. And our unpresentable parts have greater modesty. But our presentable parts have no need. But God composed the body, having given greater honor to that part which lacks it. That there should be no, what is it? Schism. I always want to say the H. I lost my place. Sorry. Thank you. In the body, but that members should have the same care for one another. If one member suffers, all the members suffer with it. Or if one member is honored, all members rejoice with it. Now you are the body of Christ and members individually. And God has appointed these in the church, first apostles, second prophets, third teachers, after that miracles, then gifts of healing, helps, administrators for varieties of tongues. All of the apostles are all, let me start over, verse 29. Are all apostles, are all prophets, are all teachers, are all workers of miracles. Do all have the gift of healing? Do all speak with tongues? Do all inherit? But earnestly desire the best gifts, and yet I should show you a more excellent way. It's simple, isn't it? He's using our physical bodies to explain to us a concept of the church. One church, many members. When Maddie was in middle school, she broke her, was it her pinky toe, Heather? I think it was. She broke a toe on her foot. She was right in the throes of a basketball season. You know how painful that is to break your toe to try to play basketball? Her whole body hurt. Her whole body hurt. Blake broke his toe in third grade, I think. And we got Parents of the Year that time. Because we said, oh, just get up, it'll be all right. We told him he could walk it off. Sheila, a really good friend, said, you might want to have it checked out. It was broke. And I was saying, oh, it's okay. He was in pain all over his body. I broke a rib one time, self-diagnosed, because I called the doctor and I said, what happens if I broke my rib? He said, I'll tell you that you broke your rib and charge you $40. I said, fair enough. My whole body hurt. It only hurt when I breathed. When I stood up, when I sat down, when I laid down, when I got in the car, when I got out of the car, when I ate dinner, when I always hurt. So what's the point of a broke rib or both of our children having broke toes? It's
this whole concept here is telling us that each one of us has different needs. Each one of us has different talents.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that, the church can function.
That's right.
Out of the area.
Clyde said that this concept in this chapter is teaching us that we have different talents and we have different needs and we have different abilities. So in that realm, we have a functioning church. It works well. Brandon, I thought had something, but I don't see him. So, did you have a comment? Oh, no, you're good? Okay. Yes, ma'am. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Miss Barbara said no matter how small the member is, it affects the whole body. Yes, sir, Mr. Curley. Yes, sir. He referenced, we can compare the church to a machine. The machine has several working parts. And as long as those parts are working, the machine's going to work well. And if we have members of the church working well, obviously the whole unit's going to be right. That's a good point to reference that mechanical thought process. Notice a couple of verses. Look at verse 20. But now indeed there are many members, yet one body. And then verse 14. For in fact the body is not one member, but many. He says the same things in different order, right? Why was he preaching to the Gentiles that there's so many members of the church? The Jews first and then to the Gentiles. Did they not have a separation mentality? They were thinking, we're not the same. We're different. And Paul, through inspiration, is saying, you're exactly the same. You have different talents, different abilities, different needs, Clyde, but you're the same, right? Yes, sir. Okay, I will. So Doug referenced that in this teaching here, that the members that were maybe lower, maybe only had a smaller amount of talent, needed to be lifted up, but the ones that had great talents, they needed to be reminded too that the smaller one's important. So he was trying to bridge the gap. And then he asked me to read verse 18 and 29. So let's do that. Verse 18. But now God has set the members, each one of them, in the body just as He pleased. And then the verse part of 28. And God has appointed these in the church, first apostles, second prophets, third teachers, after that miracles, then the gifts of healing, helps of administration, varieties of tongues. What is He doing? That's right. That's a good point. Yes. Doug said that the point being, God wanted it this way. He set it up this way, and we have to find our part in the plan. Now, if Jim asked me to lead singing, I'm going to say no. He's not going to do that. But if he asks me to read Scripture, or Dennis comes to me and says, will you read Scripture today? You know what my answer is going to be? I'm going to say, yes, sir. I'm going to find my Bible, and I'm going to try to read it before I get up here, just so there's not a word in there that comes out sideways. That don't help me a lot. What happens if someone says, Miss Betty, would you mind to teach a class on love to second graders? What's she going to do? Did it for years, she said. Did it for years. If someone has a death in the family, Sonia sends a text and says, would you mind to bring a casserole, green beans, whatever the case may be? Would you mind to clean up the multipurpose room? Would you mind to make sure the food gets coordinated? Would you mind, we can fill in the blank, right? Is that how we're serving one another? Someone calls us and says, you know, I need a ride to the doctor's office. What happens? We try to figure out how to get it done, right? Is that serving one another? It is, right? Is a home devotion serving one another? Clyde's saying yes, I agree. Why is it serving one another? Finding out more about God and His service. That's right. You're learning. She said that you're also finding out about one another. How do we serve God at the gas station, at the grocery store, at a ball game? How do we serve one another the way it's written here in 1 Corinthians 13 or 12? How do we do that? In our everyday life, how do we serve one another? Thank you. Through the love of God, that's where it starts. It's interesting to me that chapter 12 is right before 1 Corinthians 13. That talks about love, the whole chapter. So is the foundation to serve one another love? You're right.
Everybody getting ready to do the right thing in that love situation that's going to be following. I mean, you give them a foundation first, and then it gets to where the strong stuff is.
That's right. Clyde was saying that he was talking about diversity first, so he was building a foundation. He had to be in a situation that you learn the foundation, and then you got into the stronger stuff, he said. So how do we serve one another? Through love. How do we love? Demonstration. That's a really good word. We show it, right? There's so many varieties of that. You've heard the expression, he would give his shirt off of his back. What does that mean? You ever seen anybody do that? It's the love. That's exactly right. Dennis said, I've seen people take coats off, and I have too. My dad gave a boy one time a coat at a baseball game. Well, my dad's an Alabama fan, and this particular young man was an Auburn fan. My dad had an Alabama jacket on, and my dad took it off because he was cold, and he said, well, I'd rather be cold as wear an Alabama coat. Daddy said, fine. Put it back up and zipped it up and said, I'm nice and warm, you know. But the act of love wasn't the young man receiving the coat, right? Yes. Yeah, I had Maddie was playing basketball. She had a teammate that got hurt. We could not get the blood stopped. It had to get stopped. She was bleeding out of her head, right? So I had an undershirt on, and I had my shirt. So I took my shirt off, and I stopped the blood with my shirt. And they still, to this day, remember that. And Maddie played basketball. I mean, she's 24 years old now, so when was that? 15 years ago? I don't know. I didn't do it for them to remember it today. I did it to help that girl. Is that an act of love? That's how we do it, right? It's kind of hard to put in words, but it's because we don't think about it. You ever stop to help anyone on the side of the road and fix a flat tire? Have you ever stopped at an accident and didn't know the people and worked till the ambulance got there to help them? Have you ever went to the grocery store and somebody dropped 1,000 cans of corn and you help them pick it up? You ever done that? Wait, I'm not the only one that's done that, right? Okay, maybe I am. But what's the point? It was just corn, right? Exactly. Yes, ma'am. Betty referenced that shows the small things are important. And that's exactly right. It's opening a door for someone. It's saying thank you to someone. It's saying, I appreciate you. My uncle went north, somewhere north of where we are, and he said thank you to a clerk that gave him something at a convenience store. And she kind of took a deep breath and stepped back and said, you're not from here, are you? And he obviously said, no. Why? She said, I've not heard thank you in years. Years. It meant the world to her. It meant like somebody had given her $1 million. And my uncle was just that way. He just would say thank you, as we would, right? So what's the, yes, sir? It does not break your jaw to say thank you to people. I agree. I don't want you to think that I'm bragging in this next statement, because I'm not. But at our house, Daniel and myself thank Heather for our meal at night. Thank you for the preparation. Thank you for doing this. And again, I'm not trying to brag about that, but it's appreciated. And she says it to us too. Clyde does the same thing. At some point, he's thought, this is a love action, and I'm going to make sure I do it. Did he actually think that?
Will this be a good impression for your son?
Yes, and he does that. So what am I trying to say? What's the point? Yes. Oh. Lewis said that he was in a situation, at a state trooper stopped at an accident. He was the only one there in the state. Of course, north. I'm just teasing. I'm just playing. Up in Indiana, he was stopped. The state trooper at an accident. The state trooper got there, and Lewis said, is there anything I can do to help? He said, get out of here. So the guy wasn't appreciative at all. Oh, that was here. Oh, it sounded better in Indiana. That was out on the Rennie stretch. Okay. But, so what's the point of all this? Let's look at what God has told us. Look at verse 24. But our presentable parts have no need, but God composed the body, having given greater honor to that part which lacks it, that it should be no, there's that word again. Say it, Clyde. Schism in the body. What does that mean? Division in the body. No division in the body. But the members should have the same care for one another. What's the same care? It is love. It sums it up in one word, love. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you, Miss Betty said. So how do you learn that? How do you learn that everyone deserves the same care? How do we live that? Sure. Right. Charles said that, you learn sometimes the hard way. You learn in a situation that you probably messed it up and you had to change it. And he referenced, Jonathan Loveday doing some work for him on his big toe. Probably grossed Jonathan out. But Jonathan would come and come and come, and then he would find new tape, and then he would figure it out. And then Charles said, how did he have the patience to do that? Because Charles didn't at some point, which is a really good point. How patient do we need to be to show the same care? Now, when we raised children, Blake and Maddie were completely different. And now Daniel is completely different. We didn't raise them exactly the same. We raised them as individuals. Different needs, different abilities, right, Clyde? Yes.
With the same goals in mind for what they would end up being as an individual.
That's right. That's right. She said that we raised them in the same context, in the same house, with the same goals in mind, so they could grow into be the individuals. Did your parents raise your sibling the same as they did you? I know. I've got a brother that's 8 years younger than me, and he got away with everything. I asked the question one time. I said, why is he getting to do that? I didn't get to do that. I think my dad said, well, I'm tired. It just went on. We don't, do we? So how do we give members of the church, how do we more specifically take care of our congregation the same care? How do we do that? Here's my answer to the how. Because verse 26, and if one member suffers, all the members suffers with it. Or if one member is honored, all the members rejoice with it. Here's another question before I get to the answer of how. Is it easier to suffer with someone, or is it easier to rejoice with someone? Rejoice. Anybody else look at the other side, maybe? Heather said it depends on what it is. Sometimes we get a little bit jealous of someone that's doing good. We think, well, that could have been me here. Why was that not my family? Or why was it not? I do think it's easier to rejoice because they're happy. But sometimes we get selfish. So in that regard, it might be a little easier to suffer with those. Are they easy? Either one of them easy? Rejoice, suffer. Is it easy? Doug said a lot of it depends on the individual.
Sometimes
Jonathan. Sorry, I don't know where that came from. I know you're not Jonathan. Brandon said, sometimes it's really easy for us to complain.
Sometimes it depends on what's happening to us.
Sometimes it depends on what's happening to us. Those are all great thoughts. Oh my. Now you're stepping on some toes, Lewis. Did you hear what he said? Sometimes it's easier said than done. Oh, we'll talk about it. We talk a really good game, but it doesn't happen. Yes, sir, Mr. Curley. Yes, sir. He said that it is easier to rejoice because when someone is suffering, we struggle with choosing the right words or choosing the right actions. It's hard for us to make that application. You know, sometimes we say, well, I know how you feel. I don't know that we know how people feel. I cannot say that. My beautiful wife, Doug's mom died. My mom is still living, so I can't say to Doug or to Heather, I know how you feel, can I? So you're exactly right. The words are extremely difficult. Here's how I answer the question of how. 2 scriptures. Galatians chapter 5 and Colossians chapter 1. You know what those teach us? Galatians 5 is the fruit of the Spirit. So if we're going to live it today, 1 Corinthians was written to the Gentiles. It's written to Christians. It's written to me. In verse 26 says, and if one member suffers, all the members suffer with it. Or if one member is honored, all the members rejoice with it. Turn with me to Galatians chapter 5. Beginning in verse 16. I say them, walk in the Spirit, and ye shall not fulfill the lust of the flesh. For the flesh lust against the Spirit, and the Spirit against the flesh. And those are contrary to one another, so that you do not do the things that you wish. But if you are led by the Spirit, you are not under the law. Now the works of the flesh are evident. What are they? Whole list of things. Verse 22. How do I suffer with other members? Or how do I rejoice with other members in honor? Verse 22 is your answer. But the fruit of the Spirit is what? Love, joy, peace, long-suffering, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. How do you suffer? Love, joy, long-suffering. Have you ever applied long-suffering? We have, right? Kindness. What is kindness? Saying thank you. Opening the door, right? What is goodness? Faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. How do we have self-control to suffer with the members? How do we have that self-control? What is it teaching us? Can you learn self-control? Can you learn how you react to anger? I don't know that I can control what makes me mad, because things tend to make me mad. The same thing tends to make me mad. The choice I have is how I deal with it, right? So how do we learn self-control? I bit my lip, I bit my tongue until it bled because I didn't want to say some words. You ever done that or thought about that? What is self-control? Self-control is shooting 100 free throws after practice because I was shooting 70% and needed to be at 85 and nobody else in the gym. Is that self-control? Some motivation. Yes, Dennis. That's right, yeah. Dennis said it goes back to knowledge, and once we learn the knowledge, it's applied wisdom. Then the wisdom is how we should learn to be these. Complete, yeah, and then he referenced the word complete as perfect. But notice the next words in verse 23. Against such there is no law. So obviously there's not a law how much love or goodness or kindness or long-suffering, right? There's not a law against how much we can do it. So what's the application for us? It begins with love in the Spirit. We've got to be joyful. We've got to find the peace, and we've got to find long-suffering. We've got to find the kindness, and we've got to find the goodness. We've got to find faithfulness, we've got to find gentleness, and we've got to find self-control. Or we have to, you must. Must is a strong word, right? If you must do something. So how do you suffer or show honor? Turn just a few pages over to Colossians. Colossians chapter 3. This is a context that's talking about the first 11 verses is the old man. The verses 12 through 17 is talking about the new man. Old versus new. So how do we honor or rejoice with those that rejoice? How do we suffer? Look at verse 12. Therefore, as the elect of God, holy and beloved, put on what? How many of you put on a jacket this morning or a sweater? Why did you put on your jacket? Because it's cold, right? So how do we put on tender mercies? How do we put on, and let's just read them. You put on tender mercy, kindness, humility, meekness, long-suffering, bearing with one another, and forgiving one another. If anyone has a complaint against another, even as Christ forgave you, so you also must do. Put on all these things, put on love, which is the bond of perfection. Or as Dennis said, the bond of completion. How do you know it's completed? It's done, right? When's the cake done? It's completed. So, in these two contexts, we have to fill ourselves with all the good in order to serve one another, in order to honor one another. Yes, sir. Sure. Yeah. That's right. Dennis said that, it's a completion. You can't add to, you can't take away, and there's a point that things change and you have to use different words, and stuff. Yes, sir.
If we can keep ourselves in a position where we think of everybody else like we want to be treated, then most likely we're going to treat them in the way that would be respected by God.
That's right.
If we just,
Clyde said, basically, when we get in the mindset of thinking of others, all this is going to fall into place instead of thinking about me. Everybody, y'all come on in. We're wrapping up. So thank you for your attention. Thank you for your comments.